Hello, everyone. My name is Eric Waddell, Executive Director of the Maine School Management Association and the Maine School Boards Association. And I'm very pleased to be presenting you with a short little lesson on the use of social media by school board members. This was the learning component from the May School Board Support and Development Workshops. And the feedback I got from it was very positive, and many asked that I record it and share it out widely among all our 1,700 local school board members from across the state of Maine. So that's what I'm doing. So let me begin by sharing my screen. Sharing my screen. There's my slide deck. I'm going to follow this and hide myself there. All right, let's get started here. So this is, I'm just moving things around. This is school board members and social media. Some might suggest that the two don't mix, and I have to tell you the truth that when I'm doing school board governance workshops across the state, we touch upon the use of social media by school board members very briefly. And when I do, I think the slide we have in that particular slide deck for board governance training is the word social media and a universal no sign through it, indicating that it would be ideal if school board members did not engage in social media. But the reality is that we know that over 75% of adults are utilizing social media in one way or another, and that it would be unrealistic to expect school board members not to engage in social media. So, given that reality, we'll touch upon some important information for you all to hopefully help you prevent problems related to your role as a school board member and your use of social media. So what I've done is I put together this very short slide deck with about 10 questions and follow up with answers for each one. So let's get started. The first question is, what should I do if someone posts a complaint on my social page or sends me a private message? Well, remember, you do not and cannot speak on behalf of the entire board. That goes without saying, and that's for everything, not just social media. You have as a board member, you have no decision-making authority outside of the board meeting. I advise you should advise the person who reached out to you through your social media platform to follow the proper chain of command. And I think we all know what those are. You know, the if the complaint for example, it pertains to athletics, you should encourage that person to reach out to the athletics director. If it pertains to transportation, you should encourage that person who did voice a concern to you to reach out directly to the transportation director. And you certainly can help with a phone number or an email address if that would be helpful. Never suggest that you do not agree with the board's decision. So let's say that someone complains to you on social media regarding a recent decision of the school board. It would be really inappropriate for you to respond to that complaint by saying something to the effect of, I agree with you. I voted no, but I was outnumbered. I didn't prevail. Uh, you don't want to create the perception that your board is not working as a unit. And that's not to say that there are going to be times, many times, I'm sure, where there are dissenting votes related to board action. That's perfectly normal, and I think that's the sign of a really uh, effective, robust school board. Uh, to have dissenting votes from time to time. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that if you are not part of the prevailing um, uh, vote, or you voted no on something that passed, and someone reached out to you, it would be inappropriate for you to say, I agree, I voted no, but my fellow board members don't know what they're doing. That would be really an ineffective strategy for you as a board member. And finally, complaints from employees or students follow the same rule. You are not a problem solver for employees, students, or families. And I absolutely understand that for some board members, particularly new board members, they oftentimes will run for school board on that platform. You know, you can reach out to me anytime. I solve problems for a living. Um, I'll, you know, just contact me. I'll help you with your problem, but that's not your job. You're not the problem solver for anyone, employees, students, or families. Um, and so, um, and so just keep that in mind. Next question. What if I read disparaging or false remarks about the district? May I respond? Well, as long as you are clear that you're not speaking on behalf of the board, you may respond. But think first, however, about these points. And there are three of them. Will your reply spark further negative comments? Will you get dragged into a situation that will make you uncomfortable? And who is the audience? Is it a representation of the district, or is it a small group of like-minded individuals who are not really interested in your response? So what I often say is, and I have teenagers in my house, so I hear oftentimes hear the terms trolling or rage baiting. They oftentimes use that on us as parents to get us all riled up. But I do realize that there is some element of trolling going on social media platforms, and you don't want to be pulled into that. You don't want to be dragged into something where someone is just trying to get you going, to get you to bait you to engage in a debate over social media that you're probably going to lose because the audience is not almost never a representation of the whole district, and that the people that you're communicating with are like-minded individuals who don't may not probably don't agree with you. So not really a good idea, in my opinion, um, to to respond. It may be wiser to simply notify the board chairperson or the superintendent, who will likely have a better strategy for responding if a response is even warranted. And I'm going to tell you that as a former superintendent, I didn't look at the typical town social media platforms like Parents of, um, you know, and then whatever community you live in. Um, I didn't engage in that because I've often said I have a thick skin as a public school administrator for many, many years, but it was not thick enough to read um, social media. But I did have someone in my office who did keep an eye on that for me, and they didn't report back to me on all things. But if there was a matter that they felt I should know about, they would often tell me. And then what I would do is I would almost always pick up the phone, and I oftentimes knew who the person was, pick up the phone and call them. And more often than not, that person would appreciate hearing from me. I would simply say, look, I noticed that you had a question about something, or that you made a statement on the local social media platform, and it wasn't quite right. Let me give you some accurate information. And almost always they're happy to receive that. So that's a really good strategy. And I think your superintendent and board chair might appreciate that. Next question. Do I have First Amendment rights on social media? Board members do have the freedom of speech, but I also always remind board members during board governance workshops that you do not have the freedom from consequences of exercising that freedom of speech. And what could those consequences be? They could be result in negative press, public outcry, requests for you to step down, or if you're in a community that has recall for school board members or elected officials, that process could be engaged because of something because you felt compelled to exercise your freedom of speech. Just remember that people view you as a public figure, as a board member. You are a trustee of the school. Your digital behavior reflects on the district and the schools within the district. And I always ask people when they're considering. I just need to slide this over. When they're considering uh, writing something on social media, I say, would you want it in? Would you want that printed in the local newspaper? Would you say it at a public meeting? And remember to, and finally, the last thing I want to say about this is to remember to keep your official social media platform as a school board member absolutely separate from your platform as a private citizen. your private platforms separate completely. And I always say that, and I oftentimes hear board members say, "Oh, no, I do my totally separate." But then someone will point out, they'll say, "Well, on your private social media platform, you indicate that you're a member of the local school board." And so that's really not keeping them separate. That's sort of inviting people to jump into a conversation on your private platform about school board business. All right, the next question is, can I request community feedback? Can I request community feedback regarding an issue requiring board action? So my strong reaction to that is soliciting input via social media is a bad idea. First of all, what are you going to do with that feedback? It's just only you will see it. I suppose you could somehow share it out with your fellow board members, but a much more effective strategy would be for you to, instead of inviting followers to uh, you know give feedback to you directly on your social media platform, you could invite followers to contact the district via email or phone. That way, the feedback that they provide can be shared with all board members. And you always want to avoid making statements like this: "I want to hear from you. Help me decide how to vote on this matter." My question to you is, who are your constituents? Often said, your constituents are the students that you represent and that you serve in your role as a school board member. And so asking people to weigh in on an upcoming vote um, really, in my opinion, discredits you and your ability to, first of all, make decisions in the best interest of students, but to make them with open mind. That you should be making your decisions and you should be casting your vote based on the information that's provided to you by at the board meeting by the board chair, by the superintendent, or whomever might be presenting on a particular topic. And asking people to tell you how you might want to vote on this is really, in my opinion, absolving you from your responsibility that you took an oath to do, to uphold. The next question, may I post photos of students engaged in school activities? You need to remember that there are district and state privacy laws. So a group celebration following a sporting event or a full photo of an ensemble at a concert is different from a single student photo at a science fair. So consider sharing photos already published by the district. That's a really good strategy. So, as this former superintendent, I oftentimes would be in schools, and I might take a photo of a student doing, a project, for example, a science fair presentation. Before I posted that, I always checked in with the building administrative assistants who had a clear list of students names whose parents and families had given the permission for the school to utilize their photo or their image to promote things either on social media or through the press. And if they weren't on that list, they didn't get posted. And so you can be sure that if your superintendent posts something or a principal posts something, you could certainly repost that, knowing full well that the subject of that photo had been had clearance for their photo to be used. Maybe posting a message about the event without a photo is a prudent idea. So instead of a photo at all, you could post, "I was so impressed with our students at the recent science fair." That's much safer than utilizing a photo of a particular student. I think that covers it all pretty well. Let's move on to the next question. Can I comment on social media about board decisions or board meetings? Remember again, freedom of speech, not freedom from consequences. So you need to keep these things in mind if you're going to comment on your social media platforms about board decisions or board meetings. It should be just the facts. Don't editorialize. And here's an example, and it's an extreme one, but I hope it's an extreme one. I hope you see it as an extreme one. So here's one example. The board voted again this year to screw the senior class and hold graduation a week later than our neighbors. That you wouldn't want to post. However, you could say, in a social media post, the board adopted a school calendar, including the date for the 2027 graduation. That's just the facts. You're not editorializing. You're not indicating that you have disliked any part of the calendar. That would be a good example of utilizing social media in a productive way, because a lot of your followers may be interested in knowing that the school calendar is out, and now they can start planning future trips or vacations or other family business. Remember, no comments about executive session. That goes without saying. You need to respect the majority. I just need to move this bar up a bit. You need to respect the majority, even if you are not part of it. Um, that's an important thing to remember too. We've already talked about that. And I will say this, if it's a pending matter, you really need to avoid suggestions that your mind has already been made up. So if there's a big vote coming up on let's say a school closure, for example, and the school board is scheduled to vote on that recommendation in an upcoming meeting, for you to suggest that you have already decided how you're going to vote on that prior to the meeting is just not a good strategy for you to use. Um, and finally, remember, due process requires your impartiality, and I'm referring to examples of an expulsion hearing or a dismissal hearing or a dismissal hearing or a disciplinary hearing for a staff member. You serve as really as a juror in those hearings, and that if you post things in advance on your social media that your mind's made up, or even if you post a disparaging comment about a student, I hope you would never do that, or even the staff member, that really now impacts your ability to be impartial, and it really could change the outcome of the hearing itself, especially if the hearing goes in a direction that's not in sort of in favor of a student or a staff member, and they find out that a week earlier you had posted something about this, suggesting that you were going to throw the book at this person. That would really could compromise the outcome of the hearing. Next question: should the board address the use of social media by board members in policy? MSMA absolutely encourages adoption of policies. BEA and BEB, those are both are important. One is focused on social media. One is focused on email. And in some cases, I've seen school boards that have combined those policies into one because they do have such overlap. They're not required by law, but Maine School Management Association recommends that boards strongly consider adoption of both, and both are in our policy sample policy database. And if you need copies of those, don't hesitate to reach out to Charlotte Bates, our policy and research director, or you can even reach out to me, and I'll be happy to send PDFs of those to you. One other question: what can the board do if a fellow board member flouts the rules about social media? So you have a board member who, in spite of this information that I'm sharing with you today, um, says, I'm going to do whatever I want on social media, and I'm going to talk about votes, and if I vote for something and I lose, I'm going to go on my social media and start bashing the people on the board who voted against me, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, you can do something as a board. You have a policy BCA, that is a required policy, board member code of ethics. You all have that. Um, I hope that you visit it each year, preferably in the summer before the new year begins, and sort of recommit to the code of ethics. But if there's a board member who's clearly violating the code of ethics, they should be first, spoken to by the board chair. They should be, if it continues, then it could be, a public admonishment by the board chair, and it could continue on to a formal censure. And then, as I said, at some point, board, people who live in a community, um, they want a highly functioning school board. And if there's a board member who, is just not, not aligning to the code of ethics, that could result in, any number of things, up to and including um, a campaign to get that board member to be recalled, or to have them step down. So I think boards do have some leverage there, maybe even more than they may think. What about harassing or threatening social media posts? Well, if you come upon one, never respond or reply. Um, that would be a big mistake. You need to immediately consult the superintendent and the board chair. They may elect to seek legal counsel. Um, they're going to determine if there's harm. So let's say there's a threatening social media post about a board member, or maybe even about the superintendent, or about the board chair. um, they need to establish if there's harm, and that's a legal standard, and that standard is a bit higher for public officials. And I have a post, a little asterisk on this one down below. Public officials must show by clear and convincing evidence that the person posting the message acted with actual malice, that their intention was to harm. This means the defendant knew the information was false or acted with reckless disregard for whether it was false or not. They didn't take the time to make sure it was true before posting it. So there's potential for harm there, and that's again a legal matter. Is there possible imminent danger? That's an important distinction. If you come upon a harassing or threatening social media post, does the post threaten harm to a person? Or to a school, or anything. In that case, notify the superintendent and law enforcement absolutely immediately. I would recommend that you notify the superintendent, who then will engage the local law enforcement. It's nothing to be taken lightly. And I always remind people that the Maine has an open meeting law. So anytime you engage in board in board work, or anytime you engage in work related to your role as a board member, and you're doing it over social media, or you're doing it over email, that you need to be cautious about that, because if there's a quorum, and if there's an exchange of ideas, and it's outside of a regular board meeting that has been posted, and there's an agenda made, and that agenda has been posted and announced. Those are all requirements under Maine's open meeting law. You could be risking violating that law, and as a board member, you don't want to do that. So keep that in mind when you're posting things on social media, and then um, considering responding to posts on social media. That's when you might get into some trouble. So just some final considerations to wrap this up. Social media posts are permanent. Nothing truly disappears, and I think uh, I think we all know that. And if you watch the news, you know that that's the truth. And something that you posted and took down, it's never gone. Someone has almost certainly kept a copy of it, and that could be problematic. Remember, it's not just your friends who will see your posts. I want you to think screenshot and third-party posts. So oftentimes I hear board members say, "Well, I just posted that, but it was just my group of friends." And I say, "Well, look, somehow in the magic of social media and networking, your post got into the wrong hands, or the hands of the people you didn't want it to see it, and now it's spreading like it's viral." And so be aware of that. Anytime you post something, keep in mind that it's not going to be just your friends who see it, almost certainly. Always remain professional on social media, both on your personal and your professional platform. That's my advice. Your post may potentially be tomorrow's headline, and do you really want that? If you allow abuse within your social media conversation threads, you are just as culpable as the person who wrote it. So if you're engaged in some sort of social media conversation, and someone crosses the line, and the conversation um, takes a wrong turn, and you don't do anything about it, you don't come back and say, I disagree with you, that's terrible that you said that, I'm leaving this conversation. Otherwise, you become part of the problem. Are you using a district issued device? So many of you, I realize, as board members, are issued iPads or laptops to use for in your role as a board member. You need to remember that you need to follow your district's acceptable use policy that you adopted. So be aware of that. And there may be some specific rules governing the use of social media on school issued devices. Spelling and grammar do matter. I'm a former English teacher. Well, I don't think you're ever a former English teacher. I think once an English teacher, always an English teacher. Spelling and grammar do matter when you are a school board member, at least. Word choice as well. So my point is, proofreading is strongly encouraged because people will judge you based on what you write and how you write it and what you say on social media. And if your post is peppered with spelling errors and grammar errors, that's going to be a judgment on you, and then indirectly on the board. And then finally, I'd like to just remind you to watch the tone of your posts. And if you're not sure what it might sound like to others, I would encourage you to ask someone to read it out loud before you hit send. I don't even think it's good for you to read it out loud to someone else because you know what you wanted a post to sound like. I think it's always very valuable, and it's a strategy that I've used for decades, asking someone to look, would you read this back to me out loud? I want to hear what it sounds like. I want to know what it's going to sound like when others read it after I put it out there. And I would encourage you to do that as a board member as well. So that's the end of my presentation. I hope that was valuable to you. And as I said, if I can help you with anything at any time, social media related or not, don't hesitate to reach out to me. And if your board would like to have m- uh, um, a board governance workshop where we'll talk about the use of social media among many, many other topics over 90 minutes or 2 hours, don't hesitate to reach out to me. And I'd love to come visit with you. All right. I hope you have a great day.